on your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, the Chancellor has told LBC that she has no intention of repeating tax rises on the scale of last year's budget. Rachel Reeve said people should be confident that our public finances are on a firm footing.
We made decisions in the budget last year to increase taxes by £40 billion. I have absolutely no intention of repeating a budget on that scale again. That budget was absolutely necessary because the previous government left a £22 billion black hole in the public finances.
The Chancellor also confirmed that more pensioners will be eligible for winter fuel payments this year. A body has been found in the search for a British man who disappeared in Portugal. 38-year-old Greg Monks was last seen on a stag do a week ago. Donald Trump has spoken to Vladimir Putin over the phone. The US president says his Russian counterpart says he will have to respond to recent attacks on airfields by Ukraine. And HMRC says some customers have had their online accounts locked down after it detected unauthorised access to its systems. The tax office says anyone affected will be told. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 14 points at 88.01. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather: rain pushing in from the west tonight across southern and central areas. A few scattered showers further north, a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Such a lot to talk about tonight. A huge Gaza demonstration outside Parliament. The most amazing bust-up between Elon Musk and Donald Trump about something that might affect your standard of living, and much else. But I want to start today with a simple question. Are taxes going up? Asked by LBC's Aggie Chambre of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeve, and the Chancellor's very clear-sounding reply.
Yes, we made decisions in the budget last year to increase taxes by £40 billion. I have absolutely no intention of repeating a budget on that scale again.
Now, that is really significant, I think, because it lays to bed widespread speculation that Rachel Reeve was going to have to substantially raise taxes again this year. Now, of course, if you listen very carefully, she isn't ruling out raising any taxes at all, but she is ruling out big numbers, tax rises significant enough to move the dial. And that matters because the pressures for public spending are intense and growing all the time. Millions of people who already find it hard to pay the bills will be, I think, relieved that they're not going to be taxed more heavily. But millions of others will be deeply worried, for instance, about the warning by police chiefs to Keir Starmer that without more money, they're going to have to decide which crimes to fight and which crimes to walk away from. Then there's poverty all around the country. Keir Starmer wants to raise the 2-child limit on benefits, perhaps the simplest way to raise children out of poverty, and he was challenged on that at Prime Minister's Questions today by the Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch.
Can we get a simple answer? Will the government keep the 2-child benefit cap?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely determined that we will drive down child poverty. That's one of the proudest things of the last Labour government. That's why we've got a task force. That's why we've got a strategy, and we'll set out that strategy in due course. But we drive child poverty down. Under them, poverty always goes up.
Well, if he's being cautious on the specifics, that's not so surprising, because something has got to give. If taxes aren't going up, if the bond markets make it impossible to borrow much more, then it's going to have to be brutal spending cuts in the review being announced next week. So let's start by talking to Aggie Chambre herself, hot foot back from Manchester, where she was questioning the Chancellor. Aggie, great to have you back in the studio. As I said just now, she wasn't ruling out any tax increases, but she was ruling out tax increases of the kind an awful lot of people on the soft left of the Labour Party have been begging her to introduce.
Indeed, she was. And I think she was very, very careful with her language. And there's lots of people on the soft left of the party, as you know, Andrew, who want her to introduce tax rises because they are really concerned about what happens if she doesn't. And that means spending cuts. But it was really interesting listening to her, not just in the speech where she made a full-throated defence of her fiscal rules, something else some people in the left of the party and indeed on the right of the party want her to ditch. But also in that, she said real terms funding for police will go up, completely rejecting what Sir Mark Rowley had said. She didn't rule out 3.5% defence spending coming at a later date. And she also said that not everyone is going to get what they want and said good projects are going to be turned down. So it seemed to me, sitting in that audience, she's boxing herself in.
She really is. I'm a simple soul, but to me, none of this it doesn't quite add up. You know, if taxes in a big way aren't going to go up, and that's what she told you, and I think that is now clearly on the record, and it would be impossible for her really to reverse and stay as Chancellor. And she's been very, very clear about the fiscal rules. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And she's also saying, by the way, that pensioners are going to get their winter fuel back, unless they're millionaires, this winter. Then something's got to give, doesn't it?
Something has got to give, and I think she is under increasing pressure from her MPs. And I think this is something that has been frustrating to lots of people, even, honestly, the most loyal of those MPs, that she continues to box herself in and isn't honest about what options they're going to have. So, for example, on the two-child benefit cap, it seems like potentially that will be lifted. We know that's being talked about in the upper echelons of government. But how is that going to be paid for? They say they want to be very, very careful with laying out exactly how they're going to pay for everything. She was critical once again about Nigel Farage and his fantasy politics and fantasy economics in this. But it's just not clear how this is all going to end up.
Aggie, let's talk a little bit about Rachel Reeves herself, because when she became the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, a lot of people compared her to a sort of Labour Margaret Thatcher. And as things go on, this becomes clearer and clearer because she's absolutely self-certain. She's getting so many brickbats thrown at her from all sides. She's under such a lot of pressure. And yet watching your exchanges with her, watching the way she was responding to people, I didn't get a flicker or a wince of any kind of movement at all.
That was very much the feeling that I got as well. And I thought one of the really interesting exchanges was somebody asked her about Angela Rayner and that infamous memo that she wrote suggesting some tax rises. And Rachel Reeve said, well, lots of people come to me with ideas, sort of slightly putting Angela Rayner down in that.
Almost a curl of the lip. Almost
a curl of the lip, indeed. So talking about that. And then also, I just thought this full-throated defence of the fiscal rules was just fascinating, just being so clear. You know, you say they're self-imposed, but I say I have to keep them.
Well, I want to hear more about why she might be so steely about that in a moment with my next guest. Thank you very much, Aggie, because I'm going to turn now to somebody who recently published a huge review into the state of one of our public services, our prisons, the former Justice Secretary, but also somebody who was Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the old days, David Gauke. David, great to have you on the show. Now, you've written in the New Statesman about Rachel Reeves and the bond markets, and you think that some of the relatively small U-turns she's done already on winter fuel and possibly in the future on the two-child benefit cap could be, in your word, disastrous. Just explain a bit more.
So my thinking is, if you go back to last July when Rachel Reeves came in and she made that early announcement about winter fuel payments, and the reason she did that was to try to reassure the bond markets, the financial institutions that lend vast sums of money to us every year, to show that she was tough, that she would put reassuring the bond markets ahead of public opinion, that she was prepared to have a bit of a row in order to demonstrate her toughness, to reassure the markets. And my worry a little bit is, well, perhaps maybe quite a lot actually, is that if we see concerns in the bond market more generally, probably driven by what's going on in America and the reckless approach of the Trump government to their public finances, that we might have an environment in which interest rates are rising, financial institutions become reluctant to lend to governments, and that the UK could be swept up into that. And the problem for the government is if it sends out too many reassuring pieces of news to Labour MPs and to Labour voters, is that what is heard by the bond markets is, in the end, they'll bend to public opinion. They're not tough enough. to bring borrowing down, and that we may see problems in the markets. If she's unlucky, I think there's a chance that might happen.
I'm tempted to call this pig-headedness for a purpose. In other words, she has to be absolutely steady because the bond markets are genuinely scary. Now, in a moment, we're going to come on and talk about the Trump big, beautiful bill, so-called, and his row with Elon Musk. But I was interested too, you think that is something that could potentially, as it were, poison or disrupt markets around the world and affect people listening to this programme too?
Yeah, that's the risk, is that you have contagion, that if you have the bond markets, and look, interest rates have increased, bond yields have increased. They're still not at horrendous levels, but it does mean that debt interest becomes more important, both in the US and the UK. We spend more on debt interest than we spend on defence, for example. If that trend continues, and in America there seems to be very little appetite to get their public finances in order, you then have a more jittery bond market in general, and then the fear is that the UK might be next in line. If you look at our bond yields, they're higher than in Germany or France or what have you. So that's the risk, and that's the balance that Rachel Reeves has to strike. It's not an easy one. She obviously has to be political. She has to appeal to the electorate, but she cannot ignore the bond market at the same time.
Well, that is a very, very useful warning, David. There was a brief phase when even people like I had to become so-called experts in the bond market and gilts and so forth during the Liz Truss moment. I hope I never have to do that again. But moving on, as I said, you're Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Moving on to the politics of this, you mentioned the very hard choices ahead. You have done this review into sentencing, and you've been looking closely at the criminal justice system, and you know how tight the pressures are. We've had the police chiefs now saying, look, we're going to have to change the attitude we take to different crimes if you carry on not giving us enough money. This kind of public shroud waving that goes on around the public sector. What do you think Rachel Reeves's real options are, or are there none?
I think she's got a spending envelope that has already been set out. I don't think she can afford to go beyond that. If you look back at what happened in the October budget, truth be told, there was a pretty big increase in departmental spending. The challenge that she's got with the spending review that will be published on the 11th of June is that's where the allocation is across various departments. And of course, every department is going out there and saying, well, we want more spent in our area, and it's essential that we do this, and the government's got objectives, it's got to meet them. And what you've got is a handful of departments that have yet to settle, but the pool of money has kind of been whittled down, and there's not very much to fight over. And they're clearly, you look at the police and the Home Office and so on, they're clearly looking to find some extra money down the back of a sofa so that they can do a little bit better than was previously expected. And the Treasury will be minded to resist that, because you've got to sort of maintain that discipline for the reasons we were talking about.
Well, I think about half a mile from where I am sitting in the Treasury this very evening, the rubber may be hitting the road. David Gauke, who knows all about those kind of things, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. And now to a public service that has been receiving a lot of attention over the last couple of days after a letter from police chiefs sent to the Prime Minister warning what further cuts could do to their forces. Let's hear the view now of Brian Booth, Acting Deputy National Chair of the Police Federation. Brian, we've heard this reported letter of warning from police chiefs around the country to Keir Starmer. Is this shroud waving, or is there genuine fear inside the police service that without more money there are going to be crimes that are committed, frankly, with no comeback in the future around the country?
It's absolutely correct, Andrew. And it's a long time coming as this. The police chiefs are finally stepping up and waving the flag of danger here. It may sound alarmist, but it's something the Police Federation have been talking about a long time, around the lack of investment within policing. And it's had a real knock-on effect to my colleagues on the front line. You know, if you look at the surveys we carry out, how morale is so low within policing, and we've got the highest number of police leavers mid-service now, and we just seem to be recruiting more and more people and training them up with little thought around actually what that is costing the public. So it's costing the public in service, but it's also costing the public financially. So if I may, you know, we're predicting it's going to be costing around £10 billion over the next 3 years if the retention rates carry on. So we could be losing up to 10,000 officers per year going up to 2027. And again, that's £10 billion. If we actually spent some of that money looking at retaining officers rather than spending the money recruiting and retraining officers, the public are going to get a much better service because you're going to have experienced officers retained. There's going to be less officers who are in training schools, and you're going to have a happier workforce. And we all know a happier workforce is a more productive workforce.
So you're saying, in effect, this is a false economy, the way things are going. It sounds to me a little bit like what doctors have been saying about the loss of doctors from the NHS. What's going to be the effect in your area on the public of things carrying on as they are now?
Well, the danger is the public are going to get less of a service. They are going to actually see less of a police presence. And that is the danger, because the cuts that the chiefs are talking about normally mean our support staff are cut. And then police officers are taken from the front line back into back office jobs, doing the jobs that our fellow colleagues have lost.
So, Brian, just give me an example of the kind of things that the police will have to stop doing that they're doing now.
And this is the key. This is what we need, the education. If the case of there is no more money going into policing, then we need to educate the public on what we are going to stop doing, because all I can see is month after month an increase. So if we look back,
give me an example. Give me an example of what we're talking about.
So last couple of weeks, we've said there's going to be more prisoners released into the public to be managed by the probation service, and there'll be some investment into the probation service. But let's be clear, not all them prisoners are going to be good law-abiding people, and they are going to take extra policing, and that is additional work to officers. So when we talk about government making a quick delivery of something, sometimes the costings aren't put behind that. And I think that has been highlighted by the police chiefs also, that it's a poorly thought out delivery.
All right, Brian, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. It's really appreciated. Now we're going to look stateside next with a minor and temporary reprieve from Trump's tariffs to the UK and a blistering row from the recently departed buddy-in-chief Elon Musk at the US president himself. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:17.
This is LBC.
Vodafone.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. Rachel Reeves had been in Manchester to announce big new government investment in transport for the north of England, widely welcomed. But the industrial north, perhaps I should say the once industrial north, remains horribly exposed to the vagaries of the Trump administration. The latest thing is that President Trump has decided to exempt British steel and aluminium from new tariffs, but only until July, by when he wants the details of this new deal with the UK to be hammered out. So the industry remains in limbo. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, said in Brussels that essential steps were taking place at pace, he said, on that deal, and that he expected the 25% tariff to be eliminated. But with Trump, you can never really be sure about anything. So let's hear now from Phil Rowe, president of Logistics UK. Now, you might think that logistics is just a posh word for lorries, but let me tell you this. Logistics UK, formerly the Freight Transport Association, is one of the biggest business organisations in this country, representing 18,000 different companies. And because it's driving the stuff everywhere in and out of the country, it has as good an overview of the state of trade as anybody else. How does he see the threat of Trump's tariffs impacting the UK?
Yeah, I think the industry's holding its breath a little bit, Andrew, at the moment. We've been talking today that the really big impacts that have been seen have been globally on the trade from China into the US. And we've seen ports that reporting reductions of up to 40% in shipping that's going that way. But at the same time, we've seen growth in exports into Europe from China as those manufacturers look for new markets. I think in the UK, it's a bit more nuanced. Obviously, we've got our own separate deal that the government's done really well to negotiate. But I think, one of the big customers that we've worked with in the past, JLR, they've just held off and just paused. And I think there is a lot of that going on at the moment where people are waiting to see if it will settle down. And so I think activity levels are a bit lower.
So we're thinking particularly, I guess, about the steel industry, waiting to see whether those 25% tariffs are going to be gone for good or are still hanging over them. What is your instinct about how that's affecting in the steel industry in particular right now?
Well, I think you see a pausing of activity because actually if the full agreement is agreed, then it may be that reverts all the way back. So I think what you see is a reduction of immediate activity as people wait to see what's the best economic circumstances that they can avail themselves of.
And this is perhaps too general a question, in which case, forgive me, but as I say, your guys know what's going on around the country. We are desperate for growth in this economy. Where are we seeing growth and where are we failing to see growth so far as actually the logistics industry is concerned?
I mean, the logistics industry is very unusual because it's everywhere. It's on every street. It's in every town. It's in every city. And so the logistics industry is growing all the time as modern consumers consume differently. We employ 8% of the UK's workforce delivering across those areas. I think overall our experience and our logistics report shows us is that the economy is at best flat, that there are some glimmers coming in some areas of the economy, but the growth that we really want as an industry, because remember, we support every other industry in the UK, every business that exists, every consumer has a supply chain behind them, and the logistics industry makes those supply chains work. So I think at the moment we're a bit flat. Business confidence is a bit down as we measured it in the first quarter. But I think there is, real backing for growth being the number one target for the government. I think we're strongly behind that because the economy needs to grow. It's really the only way forward.
There was quite a row a couple of years ago, post-Brexit, about the supply of drivers, lorry drivers, HGV drivers in the UK economy. What's the situation now? Are there enough drivers around?
It's flat at the moment, so the driver shortage is under control. That's predominantly, I think, because the economy is flat as well. There was a whole series of measures that put in place. We were involved in a number of those, including our Generation Logistics campaign, which targets 13 to 24-year-olds to come in to the industry. So we've not sat on our hands. We're really going after getting people to come into the industry. I think probably our concern is if there's really quick growth, as unlikely as that seems at the minute, then we may struggle a little bit. But the industry is taking a lot of action and employers are training a lot of people.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm one of those people who can very happily retrain if I'm needed. But for now, Phil Rowe, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So as we hang on to reflect on whether tariffs are going to be removed or not, we remember that you never know about Donald Trump. And there has just been the most extraordinary bust-up with his one-time lieutenant and acolyte Elon Musk over the so-called big, beautiful bill of tax and spending measures Trump is currently trying to get through Congress. It would cut taxes, mainly for the rich, by $4.5 trillion. That's trillion, not billion, the largest tax cut in American history, while also cutting programs such as Medicaid and food stamps that the poorest Americans depend upon. Beyond that, it would greatly increase the already enormous American debt, and that could spook markets around the world and ultimately affect your mortgage and borrowing costs at home. So, what did Elon Musk, the world's richest man, the rocket man, the car man, who spent so much of his own money trying to get Donald Trump elected, make of his friend's prized legislation? "I'm sorry, but I just can't take it anymore," he wrote on X. "This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it." Let's talk now to LBC's man in Washington, Simon Marks. I think, Simon, in the past we have reflected on the likelihood of an eventual falling out between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but I never expected quite this level of verbiage.
Well, absolutely, Andrew. I mean, he might as well have said free at last, free at last. You know, I mean, it's only been 96 hours since Donald Trump welcomed Elon Musk to the Oval Office, gave him a send-off, despite the fact that Mr. Musk's behaviour in the room last Friday was extremely erratic, even gave him a golden key to the White House as a parting gift and insisted Elon's not really going anywhere. He'll be back and forth between his businesses and the White House. And no sooner had Elon Musk left Donald Trump's inner circle than he took a flamethrower to what is a central pillar of Donald Trump's economic policies. And this bill, by the way, it's not a so-called big, beautiful bill. That's what it is actually called. That is the name that Republicans on Capitol Hill have given it. And it is the flip side to that tariff set of policies that you were just talking about, because the White House now accepts the tariffs are going to lead to supply chain problems here. They're going to lead to price inflation. So this tax and spending bill is the other side of the coin. It's designed to provide economic stimulus to the economy to help it overcome the blip that the White House says the tariffs are going to create. And what Elon Musk has done by torpedoing this, it's a depth charge that has gone off within the Senate and the House of Representatives, orchestrated by Mr. Musk, is essentially threaten Republican backing for Donald Trump. I mean, there was a door that was ajar for him because there are almost enough members of the Senate on the Republican side to derail all of this. And by exploding that depth charge, he's absolutely encouraging Republicans on Capitol Hill completely to turn against this big, beautiful bill of Donald Trump's.
And to explain to people at home exactly what's in this bill, it's a very, very big one, so we can't explain everything. But basically, I think there's about $1 trillion switch of cuts for the poor that goes straight to the richest people in America. And because of all the extra spending in it, it's going to push American debt so high that some quite serious people think it might actually blow up the entire system.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Congressional Budget Office today, which is bipartisan, it's independent, it costs legislation so that the government and its opponents can have a hard number to talk about. The Congressional Budget Office says that this package of legislation is going to swell the deficit by $2.5 trillion. It's going to lead to a raising of America's debt ceiling and will allow the United States to have a total debt of a whopping $36 trillion. And the way it does all of this is by basically penalising the least affluent in society. It's estimated that 10.9 million Americans will go uninsured. They'll lose their access to health insurance, many of them, of course, taking up Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act to provide that insurance. It's going to see 4 million fewer people having access to food stamps, which are the handouts available for the least affluent Americans to buy basic foodstuffs. But it entails big tax cuts for business.
It's pretty horrendous. Briefly, Simon, another piece of Trump-related news. He's just come off the phone to President Putin. It doesn't sound like a very happy call. He said it was a good conversation, but not a conversation that will lead to immediate peace. President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent Ukrainian attack on his airfields. This is a new tone, really. It sounds almost kind of reflective and sad from Trump.
Yeah, definitely not peace in our time, that's for certain. And we don't learn from Donald Trump's statement how he responded. Did he do anything to dissuade Vladimir Putin from escalating the situation and engage very strongly in some kind of retaliation towards Ukraine? There is evidence in this social media posting that Vladimir Putin may once again have played Donald Trump, because it says that President Putin suggested that he could participate in ongoing discussions with Iran, designed, of course, to head off Iran's nuclear aspirations, and that he thought, President Putin, that perhaps he could be helpful in getting all of this brought to a rapid conclusion. Donald Trump certainly seems willing to take the Russian leader up on that offer, and that was almost certainly a gambit by the Kremlin leader to divert attention away from the conversation on Ukraine and say, I'm sure there's other areas where I can help you.
He may be many things, President Putin, but stupid he isn't. Simon Marks, thank you very much for that. Now then, the House of Commons was wrapped in a huge red ribbon today, held up by protesters lining the streets of Westminster as an impassioned debate took place inside about the government's reaction to the war in Gaza. We're going to hear from two MPs on opposing sides of the House who spoke out about the humanitarian situation there. But the time now is 6:32 and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
A former Chief Secretary to the Treasury has told LBC the Chancellor's U-turn on winter fuel payments could prove disastrous. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, David Gauke says it could be a signal to the bond markets that she can't stick with tough decisions. A body has been found in the search for a Scottish man who disappeared in Portugal. 38-year-old Greg Monks was reported missing a week ago after he was last seen at a stag party in Albufeira. And Britain is accusing Israel of an inhumane aid plan after claims roads close to food distribution centres in Gaza would be considered combat zones. Israel says Hamas is stealing supplies. LBC weather, rain pushing in from the west tonight across southern and central areas. A few scattered showers further north, a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC.
Or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:34. There was a large demonstration outside Parliament today, a huge red fabric border held up all around the building by pro-Palestine protesters. Inside the building, the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn called a vote to set up an independent inquiry into British involvement in the Gaza conflict. He was supported by 9 Labour MPs and the pro-Palestinian independent MPs. But what was striking in that debate was how many MPs from different parties were expressing similar amounts of anxiety about the situation there. Ministers say they're going to implement some kind of unspecific further action against Israel, but won't say when or what. But I always try to hear all sides, so let's listen first to an Israeli government spokesman, David Mencer, talking earlier to my colleague, Tom Swarbrick.
Hamas is collapsing, and its last weapon is, unfortunately, lies. As it loses on the battlefield, it's turning to propaganda. It's pumping out more and more false claims to pressure Israel. You'll see more of this over the next few days. I can almost guarantee it. There'll be wall-to-wall outrage against Israel. We're asking people not to fall for it. On this particular incident, there's an accusation that Israel's blocking aid, that it's targeting civilians. None of these things are true. The IDF did not, I repeat, did not fire on civilians near the aid site. These are Hamas lies. The IDF has already released video footage of Hamas themselves firing on Gazan civilians. That's been exposed by IDF investigation.
Well, on the ground in Gaza, it's been a day when the food distribution centres have simply been shut down. So where does that leave the population? Let's talk to James Elder of UNICEF, who's in Gaza, I think in Khan Yunis. James, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Can you just update us on what's been happening there today?
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Look, it's just a level of despair, almost despondency now. I have been in Gaza. This is my 5th time, but I've only been back for 24 hours. And on the roads, you see that universal symbol of hand to mouth, people hungry, children hungry, adults hungry. I'd seen that before here, but only in the north, not as well in the middle area, not as well in the south. Great restrictions still exist on aid. People just spend their days in quote-unquote survival mode, Andrew. They spend their days looking for food and, of course, quite often being evacuated. So for the UN, it remains that push to get the humanitarian aid in like we were allowed to during the ceasefire when we saved. When we're allowed to save lives, that's what we do. I went to a hospital. There were drone attacks on the hospital. So it's a normal day in Gaza, but it's 600 days for the civilians here.
Let me ask you about this new organisation providing the food aid, the American organisation, because they seem to have closed down these food distribution centres because of the threat of people trying to get into them being actually attacked by the IDF. So is it therefore the case that there is effectively no food distribution going on there at the moment at all?
There's none going on there, no. And unfortunately, it was a trickle anyway, Andrew, that this is really key thing to push through. It's a veneer, if you will. I mean, there's a reason the United Nations cannot and will not support this. Firstly, because we don't need another system. I've been asked several times, isn't it better than nothing? Well, the alternative is not nothing. The alternative is 400 distribution sites, 500 trucks a day, which is what we did during the ceasefire. When we're allowed to bring in that aid, it's a game changer. Malnutrition goes down, disease rates go down, access to water goes up. This is three sites out of 400, forcibly pushing people, displacing people, weaponising and politicising aid. We've said, you and I spoke, Andrew, about 3 weeks ago on this, talking of the risks, not just because aid goes to where people need it. You don't make a mother walk 15 kilometres. You certainly don't make a grandmother do that, and you don't make an amputee do that. But there's also the dangers. These are militarised zones. Gazans are terrified of this, but if it's the only aid, they will go there. And now we've seen 2 massacres in that site, maybe not in the cage. Doesn't matter. If you tell people to come to a humanitarian site, then it is your legal responsibility. And we've seen that still last night. Andrew, I saw people heading there. They're aware of the massacres. They want to feed their family.
Yeah, it's an appalling situation. David Elder, thank you very much indeed for helping us up to date in it. Really appreciated. And now, as I mentioned a little earlier, the government was facing criticism from all sides in the Commons today. 2 very prominent voices in the debate were Dr. Rosena Allin-Khan, the Labour MP for Tooting, and a medical doctor herself who recently returned from Palestine, and Sir Roger Gale, the Conservative MP for Herne Bay. In many other areas, these two would never agree, but they came into the studio this afternoon together to speak to me about the disapproval coming from all sides of the House to the government's reaction to this dreadful war.
I think over the last weeks, we have heard everyone really coming together across all sides of the House to really reflect the dismay that is felt. And we've even had people outright begging in the chamber from all sides of the House for the government to acknowledge that there needs to be an international collaboration to, quite frankly, get the Israelis to stop. And I think it doesn't matter what your politics is, there really is something about seeing children being burnt alive, hearing our very own doctors in Gaza saying it's a slaughterhouse, that really focuses everyone's attention and bridges all political divides.
So, Roger, you are on the other side of a political divide. You're a well-known Conservative, on the right of the Conservative Party in many ways. But would you agree with Rosena?
Yes. I think any parent, any grandparent, has to feel very deeply in the gut that what is being done is wrong. And some of us have frankly been saying it for quite a long time now. And the government has come back and back and back to the dispatch box with the same platitudes, the same hand-wringing, and nothing's done. I don't, particularly as a former Deputy Speaker, I don't normally shout across the chamber. But I found myself shouting today when Faulkner was saying we're going to do something, because we've been saying we're going to do something for rather too long.
And yet I get the impression, not just from Hamish Faulkner, who was the Foreign Office Minister responding to the debate, but also the Prime Minister, that they are, as it were, being forced to move slowly backwards. They're coming under more and more pressure. We've had various individuals sanctioned recently, particularly around the West Bank, and we've had different kinds of the free trade deal was frozen. We don't know what these further measures are going to be, and I'd be very interested in hearing from both of you what you think the government is thinking about and what they should be thinking about. Perhaps two different things.
Well, something that I have been calling for a number of weeks, which I repeated today, is sanctioning the individuals responsible. So Benjamin Netanyahu, Katz, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir. These people are responsible for the atrocities that are happening. And much as I understand that it's a challenge for the government, I really do echo the sentiment, and we were all shouting today, I think, when? Because we understand that things take time and that diplomatic efforts must be made. And this is also about the responsibility of the United States, other allies of the UK, to come together. But with every moment that we are sitting and talking about it, there are hundreds of thousands of people who are starving. 70% of all of those murdered are women and children. We have had 1,400 medics killed and 686 healthcare facilities flattened. At what point do we say it's time to stop waiting and we actually have to do something? Because currently Israel is completely ignoring us.
So, Roger, Israel would say this is an existential threat to us. We either have to finally destroy Hamas forever, and this is the only way to do it, or we ourselves will be destroyed. What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, they're not destroying Hamas. They're they're creating a recruiting sergeant for Hamas, because tomorrow's freedom fighters will be born of the horrors of what is happening in Gaza now. That has historically always been the case. And it will be in Gaza and in Palestine as it was anywhere else. So we don't have time. It's all very well for the government to say we're going to be diplomatic and we've got to do this the right way. We were right to condemn the attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. That was horrific.
Yes.
We are right to demand the release of the hostages, dead or alive. That is correct.
Yes.
That is horrific. But equally horrific, and the people who don't have any time are the children, the babies, who have no food, who are dehydrated, have no water, and have no medicines. So this is not tomorrow, this is today. This is a matter of urgency, Andrew, and it has to get in now.
You were, quite understandably, shouting when. If I asked you what the government should be doing now? If they could do what you would want them to do, what would it be?
The priority the absolute priority has got to be to get food, water and medicine into the people of Gaza, as many of them as possible, as fast as possible. There was a route opened up from Larnaca straight into Gaza. Those pontoons were not particularly brilliant. They were installed, as I understand it, by the Americans, and presumably there'd have to be some American involvement for them to be used. But they go straight into Gaza. They don't have to go through Israel. So that route has to be opened up again, is my view. We're talking about 50 miles across the water. It's not very far.
Not very far. Rosena, you were there not so long ago. What would be your message to people, given what you've seen? Or put it another way, how did being there change your mind? What did you see that surprised you?
My mind has never had to be changed when it comes to any atrocity involving the loss of life of innocent people. You've known me a long time, Andrew. I've been a humanitarian doctor for 15 years, and for 9 of those while being an MP. And I've called out what was going on in Myanmar. I've been to Ukraine. I've been to Palestine, as you've said, and the needless, senseless loss of life is lamentable. But the thing about this case, is, and as has been described, it is worse than hell. These deaths are entirely avoidable. Food is being used as a weapon of war. There is clear evidence being detailed of war crimes. I don't think any parent, myself included, we have the luxury, quite frankly, of going home tonight, kissing our kids, our grandkids, holding them, knowing they're safe. Parents in Palestine don't love their children any less. And the case of the doctor, like myself, who works in an emergency department, having all 9 of her children brutally murdered while she went on shift to save other children, we have to be able to look ourselves in the mirror in the twilight of our lives and know that we did everything that we could. And that is what each and every member of parliament, member of government and individual needs to be able to ask themselves.
Finally, you are both eminent parliamentarians. So, Roger, do you think this parliament can change this government's mind?
Yes. If enough good people say the right thing and bring enough pressure to bear, we can. The point I really want to make, we've all been around the block. We've seen death. We've seen starvation all around the world. This is deliberate, Andrew. This is the militarization of starvation. It is wrong. What happens after this, what happens to Netanyahu, hopefully will happen in The Hague. That's for tomorrow. This can be stopped. And in the House of Commons, we have to do whatever we can do to stop it, and we will.
So, Roger, Rosena, thank you both very much indeed for coming in and talking to LBC today. Up next, we're going to hear about an extraordinary period in history that I must confess I knew nothing about until this week. Find out more next. The time now, 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
What do you want from Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, who joins me next to take your calls? Policies or more stunts? Lines are open now, 0345 6060 973.
Ian Dale on LBC.
Apply.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:50. Now, perhaps complacently, I think I know a little bit about history. I have written a history of the world, after all. But a new book by the historian Willem Dalrymple has filled in what I have to now admit was a vast hole in my knowledge. For 1,500 years, he argues, the beating heart of human civilization, art, mathematics, technology, music, cities, shipping, wasn't European or Mediterranean or even Chinese. It was Indian. His book, The Golden Road, How Ancient India Transformed the World, is simply mind-boggling. I spoke to him this afternoon and we began to talk about how ahead of their time Indian civilization was at that particular moment in history.
So this is like the Silk Road, but it's not overland, it's using the sea routes, and it's not focused on China. It's focused on India. Those are the two big ideas. India has this great gift of being in the centre of the monsoon winds. And so as Tibet freezes in winter, cold winds rake in. As it thaws in spring, warm winds blow out. And this leads to monsoon winds that, in a very un-Indian manner, are very punctual and very well regulated. And so if you're an Indian sailor in antiquity, you can just put up a sail, and in 2 months, you're in the Roman Empire on the Red Sea coast of Egypt. On the other hand, if you go from the East Coast, in 2 months, you're in the Mekong Delta or even in China. And then the winds reverse, so you can come home again. Which is why there are Indian communities, trading communities in East Africa, in the Gulf, in the Mekong Delta, in Burma, in Singapore, and in China.
And in this period, Indian influence on both China, which converts, or the empire converts for a while to Buddhism, but also the Roman Empire, is enormously strong. And I'm really interested, you see basically Indian sculptures turning up in Pompeii and around Rome, and the Romans are spending huge amounts of money on Indian stuff.
That's right. India produces the luxuries of the Roman Empire. So pepper, which kind of Pliny, the North Italian naval commander, regards as a sort of woke spice that the metropolitan elite are putting on their food. He thinks it's a complete waste of money.
Yeah.
Plus, sort of what he regards almost as sort of porno kit, which is silk clothes, which Roman women are beginning to wear with just one wrap, so you can see their bodies beneath it. Pliny thinks this is shocking, immoral, and he can't understand why the metropolitan elites of Rome are spending their money on this, on these unnecessary luxuries.
And somebody has done a remarkable sort of plotting of where hordes of Roman gold coins turn up around the world. A lot turn up in Britain, but a huge number suddenly turn up in southern India. And a bit like Trump and tariffs, the Roman Empire gets really worried about how much of its gold is gurgling into India.
They literally put up 30% tariffs at the Red Sea coast. And this provides, we shouldn't tell Trump this, but it provides as much as a quarter of the Roman imperial budget at the peak of this trade.
Quiet.
So when you think of Hadrian's Wall or the Appian Way or the Rhine frontier, all this big Roman military engineering, maybe a quarter of that money is coming from the tax of what Pliny regards as unnecessary luxuries from India: overpriced pepper, overpriced silk, overpriced cotton, and ivory.
And meanwhile, India itself has a kind of civilization and a culture that most of us here don't really know about. You take a city like what is now Patna. At the time when the Emperor Ashoka was there, the biggest city in the world.
The biggest city in the world.
Much bigger than Rome.
And a city which is sending out missionaries with the Buddhist faith as far as Cyrene, which is Libya. So as well as the obvious places like Tibet and China, which in 500 years, the whole of Asia converts to Buddhism. This Indian faith that's born just on the banks of the Ganges spreads out without military propulsion. This is not a faith spread by the sword. It's a faith spread by ideas. And Ashoka is the man who makes this big change. He sends these missionaries out over a vast area, and with them comes not just ideas of Buddhism, but Indian ideas of language, Sanskrit and Prakrit, Indian ideas of geography and time. So a whole seasoning of Indian civilization spreads out across Asia and as far as Egypt.
And Ashoka has an extraordinary army of kind of war elephants and huge cavalry and the rest of it. And at its peak, his empire doesn't just cover almost all of what we think of as India today. It covers what we think of as what is currently Pakistan, right up into Afghanistan, right up in towards the edges of Persia or Iran.
Exactly that.
An enormous empire.
And this is the basis for 1,000 years of Indian influence from that area across the whole of Asia. So by the 7th or 8th centuries, Sanskrit, an Indian language, is being spoken all the way from Kandahar in modern Afghanistan to Bali. And it becomes the language of all civilized men. So when you go to Cambodia, to a place like Angkor Wat, you have a reading list there. You have one prime minister who puts up a reading list. He recommends his younger brother to read the following books. And they are the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas, the Upanishads, all the Indian philosophical books. And just like in the 19th century, Shakespeare and, the Western literature will be something that every educated Indian will learn. In this period, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana is what every educated man in Southeast and Central Asia will read. And you have this vast area of the world which is connected, just like Latin in the Middle Ages in the West, by Sanskrit in the East.
One of the big parallels with European history that struck me from your book is the importance of monasteries. I mean, in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, almost all culture is held in the monasteries and passed on through the monasteries. And the same here, these vast Buddhist monasteries, thousands and thousands of monks studying in one place, and beautiful architecture, actually very reminiscent of the West in the sense you get sculptures which look to me almost like Roman or classical Greek sculptures, except they've got Indian faces.
So the idea of monasticism comes from Buddhism. It's that way around. The first monks are Buddhist monks. And as we now know from recent archaeology in Egypt, that Buddhist monks were appearing in Egypt. Is there a connection between St. Anthony of Egypt, who's the first monk, founds the first Christian monasteries on the Red Sea? By the 4th century, the desert has become a city. And the whole of the Middle East, you have the Desert Fathers, the Stylites. So that's where our monasticism comes from. And there's probably a link between the two.
Well, that leads me right on to the final really important part of this, which is the impact of this understanding today, because, we're all living in the world where we recognize that China is the vast power rising in the world. We are beginning to learn about Chinese history and the depth of Chinese civilization. In a sense, that's the challenge to the West.
Correct.
And yet, in terms of numbers and ultimately, I suspect, middle-class wealth, India is right on China's heels at the moment. And therefore, this is a big part of India's self-knowledge in the world.
Absolutely. If you think back as recently as when Tony Blair first came into power, the British economy was bigger than both India and China combined. Now China is double the size of our economy, and India has overtaken us. And we will now, in our lifetime, even within 5 years, India will be the third economy in the world. So it'll be America, China, and India. Which order it'll be by the turn of the century, we don't know.
But in terms of people listening, the reason that they should start to understand Indian civilization and read books like this is because quite soon we'll look around us and the world will feel much more Indian.
Also, a lot of the stuff that we already consider our civilization actually comes from India. So if you're looking at this on a phone or on a laptop, the numbers in front of you, these are Indian numbers. They're invented in 1st century India. The idea that you can express any number up to infinity with 9 symbols plus 0 is a vast conceptual leap. Up to that point in the West, we were using MCV, XVX, all this sort of stuff. India invents 0, and from that, when it's translated into Arabic, it's translated by a man called Al-Khwarizmi, from whom the word algorithm derives. The book he writes about Indian mathematics has the nickname Algebra, from which algebra is derived. So these are all Indian ideas.
There's only a few hops from there to AI and the world that surrounds us today. Yeah. William Dalrymple, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Andrew.
So there you go, our deep past and our near future in a single conversation. I will be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the brand new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories into the order you want them, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download that all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. It's not beyond possibility that the Liberal Democrats could form the official opposition. But if they're to do that, how can they attract the extra support that they'll need? Stronger, more distinctive policies or bigger and better stunts? What do you want from the Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davey? He's joining me next to take your calls. At 8, cross question with the Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, Tan Desi, Baroness Amanda Spielman, Lib Dem Home Affairs spokeswoman